So what did you want to talk about this evening?
Oh, well, today's topic is faking it. And
that's why we did the show later in the day.
yeah, there you go. Actually, it's about a paper that was just published. Daniel Dennett and Linda Lascola published a paper called Preachers Who Are Not Believers. And this is available online. I'll actually post to the blog later on. I'll give you a link to where you can find this, because you can download this paper for yourself and read it. But it was very interesting. I read the paper. It's about 28 pages long. I wanted to go through this because it's very, very interesting. It's a small sample, but they looked at, they talked to 5 currently active ministers. There was one guy who's a Methodist, another guy who's in the United Church of Christ, a Presbyterian, one guy who's with Church of Christ, not to be confused with UCC, because they're totally different doctrines here, and then finally a Southern Baptist. So they had actually 3 liberals and 2 literalists on this. And again, these guys are all unbelievers here. And it was really interesting, and as I went through it, I kind of pulled out some information about these guys that I thought people would find interesting. And first of all was the reasons why they went into the ministry. And it comes down to, there were emotional reasons for some of them. For example, a couple of them, in one case he turned to religion to deal with a traumatic event. In one case it was the death of a friend, and in another case it was an abusive home life as he was growing up. Some of them cited love and acceptance by the church community as a reason for going into ministry. Others, they experienced childhood indoctrination in a specific religion, and that combined with some positive influences with the church as a child prompted them to go into the ministry. Almost all of them expressed a desire to help people, so this was a strong selling point. And then, of course, there were a couple of them that just had some intellectual curiosity. They had a love of learning, and there was something appealing about discussing these deep philosophical questions that they got to discuss in seminary. And then, of course, in one case, it was a desire to avoid the draft, because if you went to seminary, you didn't get drafted for the Korean War. So, but hey, it's honest.
It's funny how losing religion makes people a little more honest.
Yeah.
Just saying.
And so those were some of the reasons for going into the ministry. And then what was really interesting was why they lost their belief in God. And for most of them, they cited their seminary education. And in fact, I have a quote here that, let me see if I can find it quickly here. It boils down to, I don't think I can find it fast enough, but essentially the guy says, you can't go through seminary and come out a believer, because they're exposed to higher criticism while they're in seminary, and that's a very different thing than the devotional instruction that you get in Sunday school. They find out that the Bible's not all black and white. They learn about the history of how it was compiled and everything, and as a result, it becomes really hard to sustain a literal belief that this is somehow the Word of God.
Yeah, I would imagine to some degree it's going to depend on which seminary you go to, because some are more liberal than others. But by and large, even in some of the more conservative cemeteries, might as well be. They're killing them off, or they're burying people. In some of the more conservative seminaries, they're still going to go through a period of teaching them about biblical criticism, about textual criticism. And they may do it in these are the claims and things that you'll hear, and these are the responses that you need to be ready to give. Whereas a more liberal seminary may just provide the factual information. And I enjoyed reading, I think it was the first one that talked about this, about watching people struggle with this, that there was a significant portion of the class who from the very beginning were fighting with the instructor tooth and nail, because he was telling them that the things that they believed were literally true aren't literally true, that there was not actually an Adam and Eve.
Well, when I was reading this, one of the things that kind of struck me was how similar these guys' experiences were to what Bart Ehrman described when he went through Princeton. because he came from, I think it was Moody Bible Institute or something like that, which was a very conservative.
Was he Moody too?
I think so. I think he came from Moody. And so, of course, that's, the literalist camp, and he was very conservative. Gets to Princeton and is exposed for the first time to this higher criticism, and it just kind of blew the doors off of his views on the Bible and everything.
Yeah, I just did it without actually going to seminary.
Yeah. Well, and that
it's
gets
the
down
exact
to
same process.
And that gets down to, one of the other guys, the Southern Baptist, as a matter of fact. He read the Bible with the goal of strengthening his faith. And I read that and I thought, where have we heard that before? Because that's how Matt became an atheist.
Yeah, I actually haven't finished reading the study yet. So when I read the Southern Baptist guy's story, I'm wondering how many similarities there are.
Yeah. And then, of course, most of them describe this sort of evolutionary shift in their thinking as they kind of gradually rejected their belief in the central tenets of Christianity. And then finally, they just rejected belief in God altogether. And there's one guy that's sort of waffling around with a kind of pantheistic view on things. But it's sort of just sexed up atheism, as I think Dawkins would call it. And then, of course, the interesting thing is once they've rejected the belief, why would you stay in doing something after you don't believe in it anymore? And it's important to note that none of these guys are out as atheists to their congregations. And every one of them expressed how lonely they feel as a result of this. And that's kind of interesting when you consider the next thing in the list of why they stay. And they cited a sense of community. That they have this this group of friends in the church, and most of them talk about how they don't have any friends or resources outside of their church community. So it's interesting that they stay for the community, but they don't really feel like they're part of that community anymore. All of them expressed some fears about how it will affect their relationships with their family, their friends, their spouse, because in a lot of cases their spouses don't know that they're atheists. They're kind of strongly bound to their identities as ministers as well, and so this is a huge part of who they are, how they think of themselves. They all like helping people, and I think that's something that they don't want to give up. And finally, of course, they need the job, and they'd suffer financially if they were forced out of the ministry. That's kind of an interesting predicament, because it's almost like the church in many ways has bound them into this service, because ministers aren't paid a lot of money unless you're a televangelist, and none of these guys are. So it's not like they're rolling in cash, and so that their resources are limited, and they have families to take care of. So they can't just stop what they're doing and go do something else, because they aren't really trained for anything else.
It seems to me that one of the things that the world could really benefit from, and I see organizations like this starting more and more often, is I know there are some atheist philanthropists who have been donating to organizations and helping to promote the various groups, and some of them have started groups to help people, recovering religionists. Mm-hmm. And it would be nice if some of those groups had the ability to take pastors who feel stuck in their organizations because they have no other skill set, because they don't know what else they can do. They want to help people. They don't necessarily know how they can help people or what they need to do it, and they don't have an organization that would actually support them. Mm-hmm. We could build a support network that offers these guys a place where they can come and use whatever expertise they do have in counseling. I have it hard to believe that you could be a minister for that many years and not have some skills at counseling. You may need to modify, how you go about it and what the process is, because you could no longer just say, well, let's pray about it, which was, to me, is about the weakest form of counseling you could possibly do. But to build a network for these people so that not only are you helping the parishioners themselves who are coming out and wandering out into a world that seems scary and foreign, but now you've developed a mechanism that will allow the ministers who are leaving as well or would like to leave to help facilitate that.
Yeah. And it's interesting because we get down to how they how they rationalize their decision to not just up and leave. I mean, the financial thing is huge, but there's a couple of other things that they say that's sort of like, hey, here's some good things I can do while I'm still doing this job that I don't believe in anymore. And the interesting is Jack, the Southern Baptist minister, he's made a decision, he's leaving. As soon as he's financially, he's got another means of supporting his family, he's going to leave. So he doesn't want to be a liberal minister or go somewhere else and do this anymore. He's done.
Yeah, I think there are some good things that some of these people can do while they're still in their position. It's funny. I'm going to call this a good thing, even though I'm generally opposed to it. But they are in a position where they can soften the edges of.
And that's one of the things that they talk about in here, that they stay so they can liberalize their church. At least the liberals do.
Yeah, and while, I'll admit all day long I'm happier to live in a society with liberal theists than I am the literal fundamentalist theists. Mm-hmm. I think that it's a bit dishonest to go about doing it that way. I mean, I realize they're probably giving these people mm-hmm. most of their honest thought. It's the the leading the cow away mm-hmm. slowly type thing. But I'm going to take a much more straightforward approach. I know that comes as a shock to everybody watching the show, but when I got to the point where it was clear I could no longer believe, for much the same reasons that these guys did, it wasn't a moment where I just said, okay, religion's now irrelevant, I'm going to go on about my life. It was, wow, I've been duped and did most of the duping myself, to myself. For many years. Let's get this information out to other people so that they can stop being duped. Yeah.
So that's one of the things that they say they're trying to do is push their parishioners toward more liberal, compassionate, rational, and tolerant beliefs. And some of them actually express this belief in belief, and we see this in our email a lot. They believe that faith has value to some people, and they don't want to take that away. And so I have a couple of problems with these rationalizations. I know, shocking. And the first one is sort of like a personal one for the preachers themselves. They all talked about how lonely they feel. And in my view, they're squandering the one and only life they're sure to have in the service of a lie.
Yeah.
And they know this. And even worse, they're leading other people in service of that lie. Because by pretending to believe, they rob their parishioners an opportunity for growth. How many of their parishioners have similar doubts? How many of them would make that journey to reason and evidence if they knew their preacher was an atheist?
Yeah. And this is exactly why I kind of hedged what I was saying before. Yeah. I think they can do some good there. The question is it outweighed by the potential harm?
Yeah.
How are each one of you going to feel 20 years from now when you find out that a handful of kids that you helped teach while you knew you were lying grow up to become ministers and keep spreading the lie? Or perhaps, I'm not sure which is worse, for them to grow up and become ministers and continue to spread the lie, or for them to grow up and become ministers and get stuck exactly the way you were, to where now they're a miserable wretch who is leading other people to potentially have to do. You've got to break the cycle. I'm sure there's I'm sure there are UU churches that would be happy to have you. At a minimum, if you can't do anything else, you can find a Unitarian Universalist church that would probably take you.
Well, yeah, and if our email is any indication, you guys have lots of parishioners out there who have similar doubts, and in a lot of cases, it's almost heartbreaking getting some of these emails from people who are terrified that they're going to hell. So, I mean, if nothing else, coming out as an atheist and telling them they have nothing to fear from hell would be a huge service to a lot of your parishioners. But moving on, I think that this kind of points the way to some things that we in the atheist community, not just the Atheist Community of Austin, but the wider atheist community, there's some things that we can do to help. Kind of like what Matt was saying here. We can provide a safe community, a community that's safe for people to come in and, who are trying to escape religion. This is a safe place to come and express your doubts about your religion. Because not only are we not put off by talking about these things, many of us have made that same journey. So we can help, and we can help if only to lend a sympathetic ear.
Yeah, to the ministers, I doubt nobody thinks for a second that these are the only 5.
Oh, no.
It's not even the only 5 that were considered for this study. To the ministers out there who are in this position, I appreciate the fact that you're in a really difficult spot, that perhaps you feel alone, you have no idea what your options are, you're not sure what you'll do, you're afraid of the changes, you're afraid of coming out to your family. I think I'd point out that not only are you continuing to do harm out of fear, but your parishioners are emailing us when you could be helping them. Your parishioners, in their doubts, they don't want, when Christians have doubts, some of them are going to go to their pastor, and when they do, what are they looking for? They're looking for reassurance. But when those same individuals come and email and call in and talk to atheists, they're not looking for reassurance anymore. They're looking to have their beliefs challenged. They're looking to get information that is not necessarily consistent with what they already believe, so that they can make a better determination. Now, they may walk away from a discussion with one of us further convinced that their religion is true and accurate. And I've said before, I'm fine with that. Reasonably speaking, if you come away after a discussion with me and your faith is strengthened, okay, you were probably a lost cause in the first place. Because I fail to see how, when I was presented with the information, it took a while to tear through the barriers that religion had built up in my own mind. And so I can understand that everybody's not just going to, oh yeah, hey, I just had an argument with this atheist guy, and now I don't believe anymore. That just doesn't happen. It is a lengthy process, and I get email constantly from people who are like, yeah, I caught a clip of your show on YouTube, and then I watched a few more, and then I watched a few episodes, and I exchanged some emails with you under a different name a while back, and now I'm emailing to tell you, thank you, because your guys' show has really been, beneficial in helping me escape from religion, and I have a better understanding of things now. So I don't have any delusions about it happening instantly. But what I am concerned about is that you're in a position where you've stopped believing and you could help the other people. And to me, it is selfish and hypocritical to not do so in order to keep yourself safe and comfortable. It's the same fear tool that religion has used to manipulate people forever, only you are doing it to yourself. You are giving in and allowing this fear of the unknown, fear of being alone. Maybe it's just a matter of different character, because I came to a decision really very early once I started falling away from my religious beliefs. I would rather be alone and not believe lies than to be surrounded by people who believe lies and be fed platitudes all the time. I would rather not have my family talk to me if that was going to be the result. It's not. I would rather lose my entire base of so-called friends, because to me, anybody who's going to drop you as a friend just because your beliefs are different, probably not a friend in the first place.
Yeah. That's...
I was fine with it.
If someone decides that they're not going to be your friend because you're an atheist, they didn't like you anyway. Your atheism is just the excuse they're using now to not talk to you anymore.
Yeah, it may also be the case that they actually do still like you, but they've bought into a religious idea that says they're not allowed to be your friends anymore. How many emails do we get from people who are in relationships wondering what they need to do now that they've stopped believing and their spouse hasn't?
Yeah, or they're engaged to marry somebody who's a theist and they're an atheist, and now she's coming, it's always a guy engaged to a woman and she's the theist, and she comes back and says, "Oh, I can't be unequally yoked."
Yeah.
And my advice, if you're in a situation like that, if she can't, come to reason, then get out while you can.
Yeah.
Leave. You cannot do that.
If you can't have a rational, equitable conversation and come to some agreement before you get married, please don't get married.
Yeah.
I can't. That's a mistake of just monumental proportions.
Yes, and please don't have children.
Yes, because that's going to make things a lot more difficult.